The Global Energy War. Brought to you by MCF Energy.
How much has the political backlash, thank you, to ESG investing had on you and BlackRock?
I'm taking this very seriously. We are trying to address the misconceptions. It's hard because it's not business anymore. They're doing it in a personal way. And in the first time in my professional career, attacks are now personal. They're trying to demonize issues.
Oh, are the people whose lives you're trying to destroy, are they demonizing you? That's so sad. Joining me now, Connor Tomlinson, writer, presenter at lotuseaters.com. Connor, can you explain to people who've never heard the term before, what exactly is ESG?
Well, thank you for having me back on, Jesse. ESG is environmental, social, and governance scores. I like to conceptualize it as a top-down imposed corporate social credit score. And they kind of conceptualize it the same way. They call it a corporate social responsibility matrix. Or, as I also like to say, it's a way of ensuring against the principle of get woke, go broke, because most companies do shareholder accountability. That means that a company, its only responsibility is to deliver a profit for its shareholders. But Larry Fink over at BlackRock decided in a letter titled A Sense of Purpose that he sent to Harvard Law School that society had too much of a leadership vacuum. And what that really meant was the elected leader of the United States, President Trump, wasn't doing what the elites at Davos and in the UN wanted. And so he said, okay, what we need to step up and do is make so that the international institutions who aren't elected, the EU who are only partially elected, the American deep state who obviously aren't elected, and all of the companies that are the largest in the world need to cooperate into public-private partnerships for a whole of society approach to step into that leadership vacuum and tell exactly what us plebs, us consumers, us subjects of this new global government have to do. And the ESG, standing for environmental, social, and governance, are the three prongs of that new ethic that is being imposed on us by this corporate overlord system. So the environmental system, a great example of how that works, is BlackRock took up a 6% share in ExxonMobil. They were the second largest shareholder. And so they led an insurrection against the board, planted 3 activists on it. And that has meant that over the course of time, ExxonMobil have been investing less into fossil fuel exploration, constricting the supply of fossil fuels, making it more expensive for consumers in America, alongside the Biden administration obviously stopping that on federal land. So if you want to blame people for why your gas is so high, don't blame Vladimir Putin, blame Joe Biden and Larry Fink. The social responsibility angle, if you look at companies like Disney or Anheuser-Busch, they're investing in things like diversity ambassadors. This is the Disney executive saying that I have a not-so-secret gay agenda in putting queer characters in films, or Anheuser-Busch sponsoring Dylan Mulvaney, everyone's favorite Audrey Hepburn lookalike. The reason they're doing that is because they're trying to court one of the NGOs that is partnered with all of these hedge funds, and that is the CEI index that's from the Human Rights Campaign. And the CEI index makes it so that you have to sponsor things like transgender surgeries, have preferred pronouns, and put gay, lesbian, and bisexual and whatever other identities on your board. So again, you're hitting all the criteria of this woke social credit score. And even though it's really unprofitable, like with Anheuser-Busch, it's driving people away, it's dropping their share prices by about 30%, in the long run, they think they can weather the storm because they know that these multi-trillion-dollar asset hedge funds like Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock are going to subsidize their activism.
Okay, can you explain this human rights campaign? So I'm running a corporation. I want to make money. I want everyone on my board. I want my shareholders to make money. And the human rights campaign comes to me and tells me they want me to do something, I don't know, put a tranny in a movie I'm making. Why do I have to do it? Why don't I tell them, no, leave? What leverage do they have over me?
Well, it's twofold. So first of all, much like with the ExxonMobil people who thought, hey, fossil fuels is a great idea. That will actually make us money because it's the most prosperous fuel that we've ever created. Well, if you go against the board members who have been appointed by BlackRock, and BlackRock has been buying its way into pretty much every corporation imaginable. If you look up the lead shareholders in pretty much every company that we buy from these days, BlackRock's definitely on there. Well, because they have a say over the board members, they have a say over whether or not you stay on the board if you kick up a fuss. So most people either go along with the hegemony because they're true believers and they've been put on there by BlackRock, or they'll keep their head down just so they can go home with their pension at the end of the day and the rest of society decides to decay. And then the other thing that happens is that if you appoint these board members, these LGBTQ activists, if you decide to employ influencers like Dylan Mulvaney in your advertisements, even though it puts off your customer base, then NGOs like the Open Society Foundation, which they openly brag are a leading member and funder of the CEI index, or companies like PepsiCo or hedge funds that are partnered with the World Economic Forum and the UN will funnel lots of money into you so that even if your customers decide to bail out in droves, you might keep the wheels spinning with enough funds in the meantime until essentially you're the only gig in town. What they want is total ideological market capture. Now, it's fair to say, are these guys really drinking the Kool-Aid at the top? Are these people really bought into all of the intersectionality and all of the climate scaremongering? Well, it kind of doesn't matter in practice, because what ends up happening is if they are saying we're tying the money to this, then they have totally captured the market. And so that means it doesn't matter whether or not it's true believers. You have to be a true believer. Otherwise, you get iced out of buying from pretty much every company in America and around the world.
What's this done? What's this done to energy in Europe? Everyone knows what it's doing in America. What's it done in Europe?
Well, the problem is with energy in Europe is that if we don't make our own gas, we're largely reliant on America for export. So the perfect example of this is Germany, as we all know right now. So in 2021, I wrote a paper for the British government saying that we should invest more in nuclear power and less in renewables. Because if we were to try and make the whole of Britain renewable, it would cost, by 2030, which is what the UN is recommending, it would cost £3 trillion, and that was before the record inflation we're currently seeing, and it would only meet 26% of energy demand. Now, if you try and imagine what would happen in America if they did that, and pretty much every country doing it at the same time, it's ludicrous and unachievable. So I said, okay, we want to invest in nuclear and not have the Chinese fund the nuclear as we currently have. And the British government went, okay, we'll take that on board and put it in a bill. What they didn't read was the rest of my prediction, was that the reason we need to invest in nuclear is because the Germans didn't. They decommissioned their last nuclear power plant this year. And if they had have invested all the money they would have put in renewables into nuclear, they'd be totally energy independent and wouldn't be getting the imports from Russia. And shortly before the UK war broke out, they were getting 60% of their natural gas reserves imported in from Russia. They were a net importer of energy, the Germans, when they could have been entirely energy independent. So what ends up happening is, because they don't have Russia anymore, and we in the UK, we could tap our North Sea oil reserves, 10% of that would make us energy independent for 50 years. So why don't we do that? God knows. Instead, because the American petrodollar is the world reserve currency, at least for the meantime, we in Europe buy from America. Our share goes up. The problem is, if America, the American oil companies, are infested by ESG and are investing more in renewables and not expanding drilling capacity, and if President Biden on day one shuts down the Keystone XL pipeline, not just axing loads of jobs, but axing plenty of oil coming through states like Texas, and if he signs his fracking moratorium that he indefinitely extended, that 22% of all fracking happens on federal lands, that massively diminishes over the course of a year since he started his presidency, American oil manufacturing. Then you get to the state where, okay, a year later, when none of the new pipelines have been constructed, boom, Ukraine war hits. And as well, the interesting thing with Biden is when Trump had replenished all of America's strategic natural gas reserves, Biden decided in 2022, just as the Ukraine war nearly breaks out, he unleashes, about 18 million barrels? Now, not only was that only 3 days worth of operations in the States, but he decided not to give all of that to US consumers. Instead, he sold some of it off to Sinopec, China's state-owned gas firm, which Hunter Biden just so happened to have had shares in. So it's very interesting. What has happened is Europe has made itself completely reliant on exports, imports rather. It then cuts its nose off to spite its face with Russia, so then it will go to the US for cheaper gas. And instead, the US has decided to go all in on this net zero madness. And the interesting thing about the UK, I'll use the UK as an example, electricity prices have risen by 66.7% in the last year, and gas prices 129.4% in the last year. We could be energy independent if we had better deals with America, but America isn't producing as much gas, and if we decided to do our own gas, but we haven't. And instead, we're going the exact same way as most of these energy companies are, doubling down on renewables that won't keep the lights on.
You like what you just saw? Subscribe to the YouTube channel. The First TV has a YouTube channel. It's outstanding. Go hit that subscribe button now.